Our first half awards, fantasy MVPs, player bargains and busts, and categorical strategy for the second half. That's all coming up next on Beat the Shift. And welcome to another episode of the Beat the Shift podcast presented by Fangraphs. I am your host, Ariel Cohen, and with me as always is Ruvain Guy. How you doing, Ruvain?
I'm doing great. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic. Watched the All-Star game last week. It was a pretty drunken performance of the national anthem. I don't know if you caught that, Ruvain.
I did see it. It was kind of interesting, but I'm a little angry at Aaron Judge because he actually had a all-rise baseball clinic near where I park, and he made me 20 minutes late. And it's very hard for me to tell patients I'm running late because of Aaron Judge.
There you go. The Mets, our Mets, had the best of Aaron Judge for the last two games. The Mets sweep the season series every single game against the Yankees. Mets are looking up and up. Yankees are not, so all is right here in New York. Well, we've got a fantastic episode today. I want to welcome our guest from SiriusXM Radio, Howard Bender. What's going on, Howard?
Well, I got to tell you, I don't really appreciate the Yankee slander walking in here. That kind of, I expect that kind of behavior from people like Adam Ronis or Anthony Aniano. But to get that from you, Ariel, that really, it kind of hurts me a little bit. And I feel bad that we're starting off the episode here on such a sour note. Why you hate so much?
I'll be honest, I actually do root for the Yankees other than when they play the Mets. I'm a New York guy, so I root for them, especially if they're playing anybody else that the Mets can catch. So I'm not an anti-Yankee, but certainly I do have pride in my New York Mets.
Same here, and I will root for the Yankees also. I'm much more of a Met fan. I'll root for the Yankees, except when it comes for signing Juan Soto. Then I will not be rooting for them.
Let's see what happens if Steve Cohen's dollars can pay out at the end of the year. We got a great episode. We're going to give out mid-season awards, talk about first half, talk about what we're going to look forward to in the second half. But first, we got to get some fantasy update. Howard, we're not in a league together. However, I did draft in an auction sitting right next to you down in Florida. Remember that in Labor?
It was the ultimate distraction. It completely threw me off my game because I was sitting there in awe of Ariel Cohen and your computer display and everything. The whole setup that you had going on there was it was quite intimidating. I was like, I'm gonna have to step a little closer to the urinal right now. I'm a little embarrassed.
That's the plan. Intimidate everybody. It's all a prop. I think I had three 17-inch 4K computer screens going, if you can believe it. But definitely, you got to see up close and personal my style. I remember there was one. You and I didn't really get into a lot of bidding wars, but I remember Eric Carabell, who was sitting next to you, and Eric always goes for the middle. And sometimes when he does that, he gets priced out of some players, and he has to overpay for some of the bottom players. And I remember Whit Merrifield came out, and I had no interest in Whit Merrifield. But I just looked at him, and I know he's on the Phillies, or he was on the Phillies then, and I just looked at him, and I just gave him a stare. And whatever number he said, I just went $1 more. 7, 8, 9, and I went to 10, and I just knew he'd go to 11. And I just looked at him, and I made that face. And he went to 11, and I remember, oh, wow, I got Carabell up to 11 on that. Damn.
Well, it's a matter of knowing the room, knowing who likes who sometimes, and that's a big advantage. And intimidation can be a factor when it comes to auctions. We know that.
All right, so time to talk first half recap, and we're going to give out some awards, but before we give out some fantasy awards, let's just talk about the what happened in the first half. I was actually on Patrick Davitt's Baseball HQ Radio. A lot of topics that we're going to cover, he covered, but I want to get the Beat the Shift point of view here. So I'll throw it out to you first, Howard. What are some of the biggest stories that you've seen across baseball, not just fantasy, but across baseball in the first half?
It's kind of interesting. There's so many different ways. It's tough to separate it from baseball, like regular baseball and fantasy baseball, because, it always stays so intertwined for me. But I mean, from like a real baseball standpoint, I think, one of the best stories is really just how close that NL Central is. Like, I'm super into that, right? I want to see, even the Reds who are below 500 are not out of it. And, the Cardinals, the Pirates, they could be, they could be in it. They could be out of it. The Milwaukee is doing what they're doing, and they're doing it without like all of their best pitching that should be there. So I'm just digging on that battle in the NL Central. That's one of the big ones for me.
Yeah, and actually the AL Central is very interesting. There are 3 wild card teams in the AL Central, if you can believe that, right? You got the Twins, you got the Guardians, and the Royals. If the playoffs would start today, 3 AL Central. Who would have had that on their bingo card?
Nobody.
Not me.
Ruvain, what about you? What do you think are the biggest stories of the first half?
I think there are like 3 major stories going on. This is a little more fantasy oriented, but I think this is the year of the DH. We haven't had DHs do really well in a long time. I mean, Ohtani we understood, but Ozuna, Ohtani and Ozuna are the top 2 RBI guys in the majors. Ozuna really came, I guess, out of nowhere, and we always used to think, oh yeah, you draft a DH, it clogs your DH, but not this year. If you have a DH, they're probably performing for you. The outfielders, a couple outfielders who came out of quote-unquote left field. Jarren Duran jumped. His ADP was in the 150s, and Brenton Doyle of the Rockies, his ADP was close to 415 during draft season. Right now, him, Duran, and Brent Rooker, whose ADP was in the 230s, those are the 3, 4, 5 outfielders right now on the 5x5 roto, only behind Aaron Judge and Juan Soto. I guess no one really thought of that either. And also the pitchers who came out of nowhere. Luis Hill, who had an ADP of 457. Ronel Blanco, who had an ADP of 464. Seth Lugo, 268. Ranger Suarez, 340. All these pitchers are top 15 pitchers right now in the majors, which is, I think that's one of the major stories. A lot of them made the All-Star team, and you never even heard some people who, if you're not the fantasy fan, you've never heard of these guys before.
Yeah, so I'll give you 3 stories, or at least 3 topics that I think are worth mentioning. Number one are just the rise of some superstars, or I should say the return of some superstars. Aaron Judge, who, often injured, he's returned to absolute stardom. I mean, he was the a top 3 consensus pick just a couple years ago, and you have one down year, and all of a sudden you're booted downward, but look at him, right back to the top. And Shohei Ohtani dominating, Juan Soto dominating, and we have the rise of 2 other superstars, Ellie De La Cruz, who I'll take the loss on this one. I was of the opinion of don't draft him. He's not going to return that value, but he's certainly turned out to be absolutely worth every penny, and the rise of Tariq Skubal has been fantastic. The other 2 stories, Paul Skeens. He's looking to be like a generational pitcher. We're talking about, the last time I can remember was Steven Strasburg, when he came in and he started with a flourish. He looked like the next biggest thing, and that's the hype that I get and the attitude I get from Paul Skeens. And the other story I would say is that we've had the major losses of very top-end superstars. We're talking Ronald Acuna and Spencer Strider. I mean, in auctions, Ronald Acuna, we're debating, should he go for $50? Should he go for $60 in an auction? To have that kind of value and that kind of dominance from last year turn into an injury, really debilitating. You're losing so much value by drafting him. And Spencer Strider, same thing. He was almost a consensus top ace starter, and he's down. So very, very high values just leaving because of injury, to me, is one of the biggest stories of the first half.
Mookie Betts, you can throw him in there. You can
Sure,
throw in
yes.
Kyle Tucker missing a month's time there. That's another one. Mike Trout, even. He's not what he used to be. You were hoping just for the power for Mike Trout, but his loss is definitely there. And you know what? I'll just say this to piggyback on Reuven's the fantasy baseball. If you're looking for best value that you got in your draft, can we just shout it out for Jerks and Profar at least once? Nobody talks about this guy. He's putting together an unbelievably solid season. I know he had a quiet July so far, but you're talking about a guy who's hitting 300 with 16, 17 home runs, half a dozen stolen bases, a guy that was an afterthought beyond an afterthought.
Yeah, absolutely. And that goes right into our next topic. If we had to give a fantasy batter MVP, who would it be?
And I've got two that I'm really looking at, but if I can only pick one because I don't want to take anybody else's, I will just be the Yankees homer and take Aaron Judge. I mean, the slow start that he had, that everybody was, heavy criticism, and what he's done power wise, and just, just absolute perfection to sit and watch him hit. I mean, he's everything that you've wanted, and he's every reason that you've drafted him for as high as you did.
Ruvain, what's your vote?
I'm gonna have to go with Ellie De La Cruz. Just like you, I was fading him in drafts. I thought he was being drafted too high. But look at those numbers. I mean, today he stole a couple of bases. He's over 50 bases or 51 stolen bases so far. 18 home runs, 263 average. This is similar or pretty close to what we almost expected what Ronald Acuna was going to be doing, or somewhat in this range. Not Ellie De La Cruz. A lot of people during draft season, they were debating: is he a first rounder? Is he a second rounder? How much value you have on him? But if you took the gamble on him and you got him in the late first round, mid second round, whatever you got, you're getting a number one player right now, and he has to be on a lot of winning teams this year.
Yeah, so I'm big on value, earned value, and I'm going to go with the guy who I have on a lot of teams. It's a Brenton Doyle. I actually did draft him. This is a 15-team leagues where you would draft him, and he was generally one of my bench slots in that format. And the reason I took him is, especially in the NFBC format, is because, well, he plays in Colorado. If the Rockies are half a week in Colorado, you play him. And Brenton Doyle he's not just a great hitter. He's an elite fielder, and we know the Rockies are going to play him no matter what. I mean, we didn't expect this. He's returned $27 in a 15-team format, and we're talking about a bench spot. I mean, he would go for $1 maximum in some leagues, so you really got value out of him, and you can throw Jerks and Profar in the same situation. I just don't have any Jerks and Profar in my portfolio, but there is Brenton Doyle. To round out the top hitters in terms of value versus what you had to pay for them, Marcell Ozuna, as you mentioned earlier, Ruvain, is the top earner. He's almost a $40 player, and he went for about $9, or the auction equivalent in drafts. And so he is the top earner, earning $30 over what you've paid for him. Other big guys there, Brent Rooker is... He's earned $28. He went for about $2 in drafts. And not too far down the list, Brandon Nimmo. Brandon Nimmo's earned $26. Well, I mean, we bought him, Ruvain, in a couple leagues for just $6. So, like to root for our guys, and Brandon Nimmo is the man.
Yep. He's been outperforming, or he's considered the underappreciated Met right now because they've been doing pretty well, and he's one of the reasons they've accelerated in the standings.
All right, let's talk pitchers, and I'll go first with this one. My fantasy pitcher MVP is Seth Lugo. I don't know why the Mets got rid of that guy or refused to put him as a starter, but we're talking your number 6-7 pitcher. Take a chance on him with the Royals. Although we did talk about before the season started that the Royals were going to be better, much better than people thought, and they indeed are. Seth Lugo's earned about $29 worth of value, and he went for just about $3 in drafts. To me, he's no question. You could put Garrett Crochet in there in the mix, but I'm going to go with Seth Lugo. Howard.
Well, I mean, if we're going to look at it from a value standpoint, I love what Christopher Sanchez has done. And this was a guy who was also kind of an afterthought. People were looking at him as like their SP6, SP7 maybe. And he was, if you were looking at snake drafts, the ADP it just never went anywhere. Just listening to conversations, from Phillies management talking about, how nobody's talking about Christopher Sanchez. You're almost like, on one hand, you're like, is it too much hype, or, what's he doing for you? Now, I know he's not like a huge strikeout guy, and I know that that's something that we covet in fantasy. But when you look at the fact that he's got a sub-3 ERA, and there's the innings that he's thrown 110 innings so far, half a dozen wins. I just think for what you paid for Christopher Sanchez, I think you're getting a phenomenal return.
Absolutely, way up there with Ranger Suarez as well. He was dominant in the first half. Ruvain?
I'm going to go with Chris Sale. Chris Sale was a bounce-back candidate for me. I liked him a lot, especially going to the Braves after the Braves coming off a great season, great regular season last year, and going to the Braves, I thought it was a perfect fit for him. He was in the ADPs in the 130s. He's going for a possible Cy Young right now. He only threw 102 innings last year. He's at 110 already innings this year with 140 strikeouts with a 270 ERA, a whip under 1. I mean, with 13 wins, playing on the Braves, he looked dominant today against the Mets. He only gave up 2 hits against the Mets, 2 runs, but only 2 hits. And he's a guy that if you drafted in the 130s, he is a 1. He's your ace right now for most starters.
All right back to you, Ruvain. Let's talk rookies. Who is your rookie MVP?
Okay, well, my rookie MVP before the news today was going to be, and is still, Mason Miller. If you needed a closer, he was the closer for the A's. Very few people wanted the closer for the A's on their roster because he's not really the quote-unquote safe closer. But Mason Miller with a whip of .8, an ERA of 2.21 with 15 saves on the Braves, on the Athletics, that is a great pickup for anyone who drafted him during the draft season. I know he just broke his finger. He's going to be out for a little bit of time now, but this will keep him in Oakland. It may keep his value down next year. I know he's got a ton of strikeouts, but pitching for Oakland, you don't expect that many saves, so people may not consider him as a quote-unquote top closer next year. So he's a guy even to look for next year.
I was just can I just like throw this on to Mason Miller? Did from a baseball standpoint, did the A's just like really blow like a super opportunity? I was listening to a broadcast that Jim Bowden was doing during the Home Run Derby, and Mason Miller was like, I don't want to be a starter. Like, I only want to close. Like this, why would I want to do anything else when I'm, really good at doing this? And the A's don't sound like they're going to force him into starting. And so are they blowing an opportunity here right now? Like to get the prospect. I mean, yeah, the broken pinky is definitely a huge hassle, and that just kind of ruined it. But I feel like the A's just blew like a massive opportunity for themselves.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think he'd be his stuff plays as a closer. I don't think it plays as much as a starter. It is possible for him to start. I mean, we've seen a lot of closers become starters. Chris Sale is an example. Chris Sale started out as a closer for the White Sox, and they turned him into a starter year after. So it is possible, but he throws 102 miles an hour. I mean, if you want your starter to throw 102 miles an hour, how long is that going to last? I mean, everyone saw what happened to Jacob deGrom. I mean, Paul Skeens right now is doing that right now. We'll see how long he lasts, being able to do that time in and time out. But I think being a closer, throwing that velocity is probably the best, and you get the most value out of him as a closer more so than a starter.
I think if the Oakland Athletics were any close to competing for a division title, I think you might see pressure on the team to turn him into a starter and to maximize his value. Obviously, as a starter, his stuff would play out for longer, and when you're taking that many innings in a season, it would. But being that they're out of contention, moving to Las Vegas, I think their objective is to keep their bright guys healthy as long as they can. It's working for them right now. The Athletics, who actually had a lot of homers, they do have some pop on their team. I think it's a matter of health and build up for him, and it's working. Don't break it. Keep him healthy. Also, when you keep a guy like that healthy, and if they wanted to have a trade opportunity, they can do that. You can't trade an injured guy as well. So I think it's more they're playing the risk-averse part, and they're playing long-term. They're looking at the short-term this year, next year, nothing on the horizon. There's no point in wasting all his, quote, innings right away. That's my thoughts.
Okay.
Rookie MVP for you, Howard. Who would you give it to for the first half?
I'm gonna avoid the chalk pick here, and I'm gonna throw out Jackson Merrill. Actually, huge fan. What I love about him the most, though, was the plate discipline that he showed to open the season. And he was hitting for a high, like high average. I mean, batting average is 240 right now, something like that. So he's hitting like 270, 275. And you look at his monthly splits, and then all of a sudden, there he was in the month of June, and he just started to power up. And he didn't do it at the expense of like all of a sudden striking out a bunch. He hit for the same batting average. It was a natural progression for him. And while, yeah, the easy answer is one of like, the Paul Skeens. I love the Mason Miller, nod there. But like Jackson Merrill, I just, I feel like there's so much attention being put on so many other rookies that it's just kind of sliding under the radar for what he's done. And for where you drafted him, man, I'm definitely in on this kid.
Oh, no, I actually agree with you. I actually think that Jackson Merrill is the rookie MVP this year. We're talking a pace of about 20 homers, 20 steals. He's batting .284 on the year, and none of that looks absolutely ridiculous. It looks repeatable. This is a guy who has a very bright future. He's only 21 years old, can play a multitude of positions. I think he's very useful in both real life and in fantasy, so I'm all with you on that. If I had to go pitcher, Luis Hill. I mean, that guy just came out of nowhere. Now, I think he's a ticking time bomb. I cannot see with the peripherals and the underlying metrics how he's going to keep that up. But to date, he's absolutely provided all the value. I went to one of his starts. He looked fantastic then. Paul Skeens, by the end of the year, should overtake Hill. But, yeah, for me, I agree with you, Howard. Jackson Merrill is the guy. And before we go into our biggest busts of the year, it's time for the Injury Gurus Trivia of the Week.
So as we're going to discuss the biggest fantasy busts for the first half of the season, I have two of them. I'm going to go by saying that these are non-injury related first half busts, because if you want to go injury related busts, we mentioned Acuna already, you mentioned Spencer Strider, but I'm going to give this player's stats, and I want you to try to figure out who he is, okay? This player is batting .233, 13 home runs, 44 RBIs, 112 strikeouts on the year. He was drafted within the first 2 rounds during draft season. Who is this player?
That player is my biggest bust of the first half. I know exactly who you're talking about. Ladies and gentlemen, Atlanta Braves first baseman, Matt Olson.
You are 100% correct. I mean, his ADP during draft season was 15, so you could have got him in the end of the first round, beginning of the second round. He's coming off a 50-homer season and hasn't hit less than 34 home runs since 2018, if you don't count 2020. He hasn't hit less than 34 homers since 2018, and look what he's done for you so far. Not only that, he's 10 for his last 72, so he doesn't really show any signs that he's turning it around. I mean, if you drafted him where he was going, or if you drafted, let's say, in the top 5, Corbin Carroll, those two guys are complete busts, and and it's basically like having Ronald Acuna on your team for the entire season injured. There's nothing, they're underperforming where they are. You're still getting the stats, obviously they're not hurt, but I mean, Corbin Carroll, 2 homers, 20 stolen bases, 210 average for a top 5 pick. I mean, I think he may be playing injured with a possible shoulder issue, but I mean, if you drafted one of those two guys, I don't know how your offense could possibly recover.
Yeah. Howard, other than Ronald Acuna and Spencer Strider, which are totally injury related, who is your biggest bust of the year?
Oh man, it was. I'm serious. It was Matt Olson.
Yeah.
Like here's the thing. Like, and it's like what makes a bust, and it's not injury related. It's a guy who you can't take out of your starting lineup because he is a great player, and you do have this belief that at some point he could turn it around. If you can't take him out, then that's the huge issue right there. So. I'll shout out to Matt Olson. He is definitely the biggest bust. My other, big bust though also is Bo Bichette. I mean, what happened to that kid, right? I don't even want to brush his hair anymore.
Yeah, the thing is that Matt Olson, obviously terrible bust, but he is earning positive value. He's earned about $8 worth in a 15-team league format, so he's way above. He is. He's way above replacement. I mean, there's absolutely no reason for anybody to sit him. I mean, he's obviously not what you paid for, but he's earning positive. We're talking like 14th round value or whatever it is. So
I traded him. I traded him for Vinny Pasquantino and Justin Steele.
Okay, and Justin Steele. Okay. Sure.
By the way, fun fact about Bo Bichette. On one of his baseball rookie cards, it said that he used to comb his hair using a horse brush. I just found that funny. Yeah, that was very interesting. I just thought I'd throw that in there.
Bo Bichette is not earning positive value. He's been negative, so I think he's far worse. By the way, Matt Olson on that Labor team that I drafted for Ian, and Ian is in first place. I drafted Matt Olson as my big pick. Can you imagine if he actually did anything what he was supposed to do? Wow, that would have been sweet. I actually think the biggest bust of the year. It's sort of injury related, but he was going poorly until then. Michael Harris, he was being drafted in the late second round, and he's returned to negative value also, and now he's hurt to boot. He'll be back hopefully, but he was very overdrafted this year. I'll take the L on him. I was a Harris fan this year, but he's been absolutely awful. The other guy I'd say on the pitching side, other than obviously Strider, is Kevin Gausman. Now, he is also above replacements. You're not going to sit him in any start, but he's returned $4 of value. He's being drafted for $26, $27 in drafts. That was a huge, huge disappointment. I hope, though, he does turn it around, and I think he can for the rest of the year. But he's been brutal.
Yeah, the question now whether or not he may get traded. I mean, that's a possibility because everyone expected the Blue Jays to do well, and you combine. Think of your fantasy team. If you had Bo Bichette and Kevin Gausman on your fantasy team, and they're not performing, you have the Blue Jays. That's basically what you have right now, and that's why the Blue Jays are near the bottom of the AL East.
I want to talk a little bit of strategy here in roto leagues because you're dealing with categories, and categories move. Runs, RBIs, batting averages, there's ratios, there's counting stats. But not all stats are created equal, and you might have more stats come later, more stats come earlier in the year. For you, Howard, what would you say are the categories that in the second half might be the ones that you can catch up more, that have more movement in, and you might be able to make gains in? And what categories in Roto do you think that just harder to make gains in the end, you're sort of stuck where you are?
All right, so categories that I think you can always move in, and you take a look, throughout your standings: stolen bases and strikeouts. Those are the two that I always see like the biggest bunches. And if it's stolen bases, you get yourself one big burner, and he can really just like a hot week can really turn you around in that category, despite the fact that there are a lot of guys stealing bases. Strikeouts, it takes a little bit more time to build up, but you can do it by making that happen. As far as like toughest to move around, it's got to be whip. You look at that category, you can try and help yourself with some middle relief or some back end, relief pitching to do that. But one bad outing just immediately puts you back behind again. So always a tough one for me.
Yeah. Stolen bases, though, I'll say that there was more movement a few years ago when you had rosters expanding up to 40 players, because then you would have guys who would be brought up who are literally just there to pinch run, the Jared Dysons who come up and steal 3 bases in a game, right? And you can just pluck somebody off the waiver wire, and in 1 week he'll steal 7 bases. You don't have that anymore. Stolen bases are still more abundant in September than they are in other months, but it's not as it used to be. I will say ERA is a category, though, even though it's a ratio one, you can make strides in more because, remember, it's not just you having a good outing. If somebody else has a bad outing or a really bad outing, they can fall pretty quickly. What you think is a massive lead in ERA may not turn out to be because you've got to have pressure from both sides as opposed to, just RBIs. Well, if somebody has amassed that RBI, it's not going down. You have to overtake them. And RBIs are a huge counting number, and you can have 1,000 RBIs for the team. That's going to be harder to make gains. Stolen bases are a lower quantity. Wins are a lower quantity. Although wins, again, are tougher than it used to be because you don't have starters going deep into games. It's really changed a lot, Howard, in the last couple of years in terms of what you can gain late in the year, I'll tell you.
It definitely is, listen, like any fantasy game, it's always evolving, it's always changing. I remember it was like, the late 90s, it was, saves and steals. That's where you were going. Those were your big movable categories over there. And then all of a sudden steals dropped off and now they're back. And, it does gravitate from year to year. I just, when I knew that I was going to be on the show, that was one of the things I did. I looked like across all of my fantasy baseball leagues, that I'm in, like, where can I move the most?
And if you mentioned ERA, I'm going to mention ERA, WHIP, and even batting average because we're in a league together in GDD. And I've lost 12 points total in ERA, whip, and batting average because my team went through 2 cold weeks. I went from having 118, 119 points to 106, 107, even 108 points in the league. And I fell from first to second. So, and the fact that we're going to be using a lot of two-star pitchers now, or we're going to try to use two-star pitchers to catch up on those strikeouts and to catch up on those wins. Your ERA and whip can fluctuate, and a lot of people are going to be doing this, and that can fluctuate the ERA and whip a lot. The one thing I think you don't get the most movement is power. Where are you getting a 25 home run hitter off the waiver wire? That's not, unless you're making a trade, that's not happening. Where you are in the power standings, that's basically where you're going to be. It's very hard to jump. Even if your home run hitter gets hot, you're not going to make such a huge jump in the power standings.
Yeah, it's also a combination of the waiver wire. You mentioned a good point, right? When I mentioned you can pluck guys off the waiver wire, give you steals, you certainly can't do that in power. There are no big home run guys available on the waiver wire. You might be able to find some scarce steals guy, some quickie guy. You might be able to vulture some wins off the waiver wire, but you can't make that up in power. So that's a very good point about that. By the way, Ruvain, am I going to be passing you? Actually, me and Derek Carty, we share a team. Are we going to be passing you soon in GDD?
Not if I'm able to make a trade. The only way I can stay ahead of you guys is if I make a trade, and I have some trade offers out there. Otherwise, I am going to fall. And I told you this early in the season. I saw that I was first in ERA, first in whip, I was first in batting average, and I've dropped in all those categories. And, I saw it coming because I just needed to get cold for 1 or 2 weeks, and that's happened. So now I feel very vulnerable, so I have to make that trade.
All right, let's talk about second half, and let's talk about some players first that you might think were hot that will absolutely tail off. Howard, who's a guy that you think will regress, won't return his value that he did in the first half?
Well, I mean, you've mentioned him a couple of times and what a great value he was, and that's Brent Rooker. I'm worried that Brent Rooker gets traded. I think playing for the A's has been the best thing for him, and it's given him full-time at-bats. But I mean, if you're the A's and you're looking to, kind of rebuild heading into your new home in Las Vegas, are you going to trade Brent Rooker? And where does he go? Where does he land? Who does he start for? Does he even start, or is he a bat off the bench?
Ruvain?
I'm going to go with Adolis Garcia and some pitchers. Now, I'm mentioning Adolis Garcia because Adolis Garcia is perennially a bad second half player. If you look, I went to his Fangraphs page, and if you look at his splits from the last couple seasons, the first half is significantly better than the second half. So I think there may be some regression for him, especially he's over 30 now, he's 31, so you may see some more regression in the second half. We'll see how that plays out. But what I'm really, really interested in are the innings for Chris Sale, Ranger Suarez, Tarek Skubal to a certain extent, because all these guys haven't thrown that many innings. I mean, Tarek Skubal has not thrown more than 149 innings in a year. He's already at 123. So he's a top pitcher right now. But how much longer is he going to be pitching and effectively? That's what you want. He'll probably surpass the 150 inning. He'll probably get to 160, 170, but you want those innings to be the same type of innings that you're getting now, as opposed to he's getting tired and you don't know where you're going to get from him.
Yeah, good point. With pitchers, you can have shutdowns or hitting a cliff or a wall or so. I'll throw out two guys. You mentioned Brent Rooker. That's an obvious one. Jose Barrios. Now, he's already seen this. He had a great first month and a half to the season, but he's been terrible. And actually, I think he's going to absolutely implode even more. We're talking about a guy who his swing strike rate down is just to 8% swing strike rate down. His K-minus PB is awful. He's got over a 5-something FIP. And he's actually been lucky with the BABIP. He has a 259 BABIP, which is actually lucky for a pitcher, and he's been that bad. He's going to implode even more. I do have Jose Barrios on a team. I'm not playing him at all. It's probably going to be a drop unless you're in the deepest of leagues. And I'll mention C.J. Abrams. He's not a 270 hitter. He's not a 30 home run player. You actually bought him for his steals, right? If you bought him, you're like, oh, he's going to steal. He's not even stealing the right amount. He's really, I guess you're getting the value from him, but not exactly where you want it. He's been lucky. His BABIP has been higher than his norm. His K rate has been higher than usual. His homer to fly ball ratio is way over his norm. And the Nationals might be trading away some people. So the run production, right, the runs and RBIs, that's going to tail off even more. So everything that he's been hot, he's going to regress, and it's going to be compounded by the lineup situation is going to be there. So I would shy away a little bit from C.J. Abrams. Let's talk about players who might heat up a little bit, who were not great, but hey, take a chance on him. Howard, who's somebody that you might want to look at?
See, I feel like this is a question in wish casting, right? Like I need Corbin Carroll to turn it around. I need Tyro Estrada to turn it around. I need Julio Rodriguez to turn it around. Those three guys, I mean, listen, the talent levels for Carroll and J-Rod are through the roof. Like, I mean, the pullback and the problems from this year, massive problems, massive issues here. And so, like when you try to identify it, I don't know if I can find what the exact issue is. And then I look at Estrada, a guy who I thought was going to get some good power and some speed out of as well. Also kind of a disappointment. So those are three. Again, I think it's more wish casting than it is anything else. But those are the three I'm eyeballing.
Yeah, we picked up Thairo Estrada. I think he has a good shot of doing that. Ruven?
Well, I'm going to echo the Julio Rodriguez, and I have some facts to back it up that I think he's going to do well. And plus, he's injured right now. You can probably, if you want to trade for him, if you're in a trading lead, he's a guy to get because the last 2 seasons, the second half of the season, this is just the second half, Julio Rodriguez batted .300 with 19 home runs, and in 2022, that was last year, and the year before in 2022, he batted over .300 with 13 home runs. So he actually does better in the second half of the season. So if you can buy him at a quote-unquote discount and trade someone who you think is going to be on the way down, then he's a guy you may want to get because I think that once he gets back from injury, I mean, it was a freak injury running into the wall, sprained ankle, he may be back even August 1st, which is pretty quick, which is next week. So he may not even be out for that long. But he's a guy you may want to quote-unquote buy low on because he's prone to have a good second half of the season.
I'm going to go with Randy Arozarena, who I think is going to have a much better second half. His BABIP is really cut his batting average. He's not a .202 batting average player. And he's going to end up with something like around 20 homers, 25 steals. So that's somebody who, he's still valuable now, but he's going to be even more valuable in the second half. And I'll throw out a homer pick. I think Pete Alonso, I think that 40 home run pace he hasn't been at this year, but he might. He's been heating up in the summer. June, July, August, those are prime months for the ball heating up, the homers flying out. I think that he's going to crank it up. He already started, and he's in a contract year. It's time for him and the Scott Boras Fest to get going. So I think Pete Alonso might be a guy. I'm hoping,
I'm actually hoping for that as well with Pete Alonso. Also for the fact that he's donating $1,000 per home run to rescues and animal shelters across the country. So he's my guy.
Yes, and today he's actually wearing the Grimace cleats. He's wearing purple cleats today. So throw that out there also. Maybe that'll change his luck a little bit.
Since Grimace threw out the first pitch at Citi Field, the Mets have been pretty good. So Grimace is the reason for the Mets' success this year. Absolutely. All right, time for the waiver wire. Let's throw out a couple of guys that maybe in the short term, maybe in the long term that you're thinking about that might be available in your leagues. We could be of any size. We leave it very open. Howard, who's a couple of guys that you might want to pick up this week?
Well, listen, if you're just looking for some cheap power, even though Reuven says you can't move up there, Juan Yepez is somebody who I'm definitely looking at. He also qualifies in the outfield at first base, so I'm doing that. But the guy who I'm kind of trying to, sneak in there is Connor Norby. I'm just going to keep throwing darts at these Baltimore rookies until somebody really delivers for me. But with Jorge Mateo on the IL, he's going to be down. They've already said that Norby is going to be the guy who's going to replace him, and he's probably going to be getting some regular at bats. So if you're looking for a little power at the corner infield spot, Connor Norby's somebody I like.
I like it. What about you, Ruve?
I got a few guys here that are very interesting. One of them may only be for a week or so, and that's Victor Robles because he's playing with when Julio Rodriguez is out. But this past week, he's batting .381 with 4 stolen bases, and he's got 12 stolen bases already for the year. He's only 10% owned in CBS, and he's living up to his stolen base hype that he had in Washington. They never fulfilled. So he's a guy, if you want stolen bases for a little bit while, he's a guy to get I think they'll try to keep playing him. Gavin Lux, he's on a hot streak right now. He's only 15% on CBS. And the last week, he's batting 412, 2 homers, 5 RBIs, and a stolen base. He's a guy who can go 15-15. I have to mention OMG, Jose Iglesias. He's playing well. He's eligible at second, third, and short. He's only 19% on CBS. He's batting 381. He's hitting. He doesn't have that much power. He'll get you some RBIs, but they moved him into the second hole in the batting order today, which is interesting if it continues. And if you need batting average, he's a guy you can get. And a guy who I picked up last week in GDD and I'm really high on is Xavier Edwards for the Marlins. He's been playing second place shortstop for the season already. He's batting 361, no homers, but 4 stolen bases. He used to be a top prospect before. He's a guy you may want to look into because he's only 23% on CBS, and these are all guys middle infield. If second base is shallow, you're getting injuries. These are guys you may want to look into.
I had a couple of guys. I'll mention 3 of them all in one shot. Max Schumann, Tyler Fitzgerald, Wenzel Perez. They're all roughly around 20-25% owned on CBS. They all have a power speed blend, and so far this year, actually pretty good batting average. Of the 3, I like Wenzel Perez the best because he is not looking like the product of some luck. He's got an excellent strikeout rate, very good, decent walk rate, and he's batting high up in the order. He's actually playing mostly leadoff. So those 3 are interesting for the power. We're talking about many paths to value. Maybe they'll steal more, hit less homers. Maybe they'll hit more homers, less steals. There's just different value you can get out of them. Guys who do everything, there's always more to look for and a higher probability of retaining some profit. So those are 3, and Wenzel Perez is my favorite. I'll mention 2 others quickly. Jeff McNeil, he is heating up, although, I don't know, is he going to lose some playing time to Iglesias? It's a good situation for the Mets to have, I'll tell you that. He might be available. He's available in 25% of leagues. Tristan Cassis, he's going to come back soon. This is, I'd say, a 12-team mixed pickup. I think 15-team leagues, he's a must-add if he's still available. Maybe in an NFBC format where there's no IL, he could still be out there. So take a look at Tristan Cassis. Pitcher preview. Let's see who we are going to pick up for this week. Howard, who's the guy that you might want to pick up for this week, next week, something in the short term possibly?
Listen, if you're trying to maximize, get some strikeouts or whatever, a couple of 2-star pitchers with, actually there are 3 2-star pitchers who I kind of like. I'll take a shot on Lance Lynn. He's got Pittsburgh and Washington coming up. I'll take a shot on Jordan Montgomery, Royals in Pittsburgh, and then I'll take a shot maybe on Albert Suarez, considering he's got Miami and San Diego. Now, San Diego's a tougher matchup, but I'm thinking that Suarez against Miami is going to be at least a nice shot for you there, just quick and dirty.
Yeah, there's actually a bunch of 2-star pitchers that are somewhat interesting this week. I haven't found that all year. I really haven't found anybody I'm interested in, but there's a bunch here, and certainly if your ERA is shot, if your WHIP is shot, and the only way you can gain is in volume, the 2-star method is the way to go, and this is actually a prime week to do it. Ruvain, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent way of doing it, but I actually have 1-star guys who maybe 2-start the following week. That's a way to go about it also. I know we don't really like Colorado pictures, and you really don't like Kyle Freeland. He's only 11% owned in CBS, but he's scheduled to pitch against the Angels in Anaheim, not in Colorado, and he has not allowed more than two earned runs since coming off the IL on June 23rd, and he's gone at least 6 innings in each of those starts with at least 3 strikeouts per game. So that's a very interesting pickup if you want to try that. And another guy who's a 1-start, who's only 6% owned in CBS, so this is even deeper, that's Randy Vasquez of the Padres. He's playing against Colorado, also in San Diego, and just like Freeland, he has not allowed more than 2 earned runs in a start since June 17th. He's lowered his season ERA from that time from 5.7 to 4.17. So if you want 1-star guys who maybe 2-start the following week, that may be interesting. Those are 2 guys you may want to think about.
All right, I'll give a couple of guys. Ryan Nelson, 20% owned. He takes on Washington this week. Then he's 2-start at Cleveland and Philadelphia. Don't love that second week, but I do like the start this week. Alec Marsh, who's been better than people think on the Royals. He's got a 4.75 ERA, but his Sierra 4.12. He's got a 22% strikeout rate, a 15% K- BB. That's not bad. He's at Chicago and at Detroit, so that's interesting. Colin Ray, he's 9-3 on the year with a 3.6 ERA versus Atlanta at Washington. Then he plays Cincinnati next week. That's interesting to me. Simeon Woods Richardson, he's 2-start at the Mets, who don't score a ton of runs, and the White Sox. So that's a good 2-start matchup. So I'll give that a go on a very good Twins team. And someone to speculate on who's got good stills, can't stay healthy, but might be healthy now. Alex Cobb looks like he's coming back. He's versus Oakland, and then he's at Washington next week. He might not give you the length to get a win, so I caution if you're going to pick somebody for the win, but he's somebody with skills that could turn something good and might get you good ratios over a bunch of innings for the week. All right, up to injury update. Ruvain, what's going on? Who's hurt? And when are they getting better?
Well, let's start with Mason Miller because we did mention him. He was placed on the IL today, actually, with a broken left pinky finger, non-throwing hand. He injured his finger while he was working out after a loss where he punched the table. That's what happened. He usually this type of injury is about a month or so, unless it requires surgery. Then it may be out for even longer. Lucas, I don't know, I'm going to get this wrong. Lucas Urseg is a favorite to close for the Athletics, but I don't know if you want to take Mason Miller's replacement. I'm not, you never know what you're going to get. Royce Lewis is on a rehab assignment. He's going to go out next week, and he could return by the end of next week. So if you have him on your injured list, and you may want to plug him in to see if you want from the end of the week, so that's a very good thing for him as long as he doesn't have any setbacks or he doesn't get hurt, walking out of the dugout to his first game back. Mike Trout, he has pulled from his rehab assignment. He had soreness in his surgically repaired left knee. There's no timetable for when he's going to come back, as the Angels are still reevaluating him. Christian Yelich was placed on the IL with lower back inflammation, but there's little more to the story. So far, he's chosen rest and rehab and no surgery, but surgery is on the table. He's been dealing with back issues since 2015. In 2015, he was diagnosed with a bulging disc in his back. Bulging discs in the back don't get better on their own. This is why he's had these chronic issues and why he may end up needing surgery sometime down in the future. I mentioned about J-Rod Julio Rodriguez, who's placed on the IL with a sprained right ankle. He could be back. He'll be reevaluated on August 1st and may come back for the following week. And I will have to mention Ozzie Albies because he suffered a left wrist fracture while trying to tag someone out on a stolen base attempt. They said he's going to miss let's say about 8 weeks, 6 to 8 weeks. I actually spoke to one of the beat writers from Atlanta, from the Braves, and I asked, did they even think about putting him on the 60-day IL? They said no, they didn't think about it because he's too valuable to the team to think that he's going to be out for that long. This is something that fantasy owners should play and use for their own knowledge. If you think the player is on the injured list right now and you think he's not going to come back, you have to measure how much value he has for your team when he comes back. If you think it's worth for him to come back, like for Ozzie Albies, when he comes back 8 weeks from now, you're talking about close to the end September around. How much value are you going to get out of him? If you're in a playoff league, how much value are you going to get out of him? He's a guy you may be able to drop and not have to worry about someone picking up.
Yeah, it's coming down to it where any injury, a month or whatever, you're losing significant time. It's a very high percentage of the remainder of the season. So time to cut bait if your roster won't allow it. Boy, those Braves are really reeling. The Mets beat them tonight on a walk-off single by, yes, the Squirrel, Jeff McNeil, as we said, just to pick him up. Are the Mets a half game back of the Braves right now? If you would have told me before the season, Ruvain, it's July 25th and the Mets are going to be a half game in back of the Braves, would you have taken that?
I am shocked. I had no expectations coming to the season. That's probably the best way to go about it because, listen, Howard, you're a Yankee fan. You have expectations coming in the season. You have Juan Soto. They're all in. So when your expectations get shot down or when they're on the way down, it's a lot worse. When you have no expectations, it's so much better. The ride is so much more fun. Right, Howard?
I mean, that sounds like that Calvin and Hobbes comic strip where he's like, my life is a lot easier the lower I keep everyone's expectations.
Yeah, can you remember a Yankee season where you didn't come in expecting to win the whole thing? Like the Yankees always have very high expectations.
Yeah, it was the 80s, and you knew every time Jesse Barfield jumped out onto the field, you knew that it just wasn't going to happen for you.
What do you mean? A middle line of Jesse Barfield, Steve Balboni, and Henry Cotto wasn't doing it for you?
Great pull on Henry Cotto. Throw me some Dale Berra in there too, and it's a winner.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Well, Yankees traded for Juan Soto. That's got to be an expectation.
Oh, of course there's an expectation. Yeah. There definitely is. It's it's not something that you like seeing. I mean, listen, there are a lot of flaws in the team. The beginning of the season was phenomenal, right? Their rotation was sick, and then all of a sudden, boom, like everybody went in the tank all at the same time. It got real ugly real fast. So, yeah, it's definitely there's an air of disappointment. I just listen, because I'm dealing with like I said, when we started this whole thing, I expect certain things from Ronis and Aniano, and that kind of. I have no sympathy for the Mets or the Mets fans, and I can't really, I can't support you. If it was the Mets against the Mariners in the World Series, I'd be all gung ho Seattle.
We had Keith Rad on our show to start the season, and we tell him, hey Keith, we're big Mets fans, and he says, I'm sorry for you guys.
and he's the play-by-play announcer for the Mets on the radio. I mean, that's being a Met fan builds character, just like being a Jets fan, it builds character. You have expectations, you don't have expectations. You have years when you don't know what to expect. You have years when you hope and you pray, and then you get answered by the devil because you get answered. You have a great season, then it just collapses at the end.
Howard, over under 4 snaps for Aaron Rodgers this year.
I'll take the over. How about this? I'll ask you guys this. What's the? I'll set it at 6.5. How many saves for AJ Puck now that he's a Diamondback?
I'm gonna take the over because he's a lefty. I think they'll go by committee. I think it'll be Seawald and Puck, and I think he'll get more than 6. I think he'll get 7 more. Yeah,
that's what I'm talking about, baby.
That's not a bad number. I'm gonna go with the under, but that's not a bad number. I think any more, I take the over. Yeah.
Well, that's the first of many trades that are going to happen from bullpen guys. That's all, and that he wasn't even the best Miami guy out there. So I wonder what they're asking for Tanner Scott.
No. Well, let's see. I picked. I mean, we had on Zinke on the show last week, who's like, pick up Puck. He might be the closer in Miami. Well, he could be the closer. It's not Miami. So we'll have to see.
Wow, I mean, Paul Sewald hasn't looked particularly good lately, has he?
No.
Ever since Frank the Tank threw out the first pitch in Seattle and took a picture with Paul Sewald, his ERA is like over 6 or something, some crazy number.
So it's the anti-grimace?
Gotta get
anti-grimace, yeah, exactly.
Anti-grimace. Don't get him anywhere near Citi Field, guys. Nowhere near Citi Field. No. All right, this has been a fantastic show. I want to thank Howard Bender from Fantasy Alarm and from SiriusXM Radio for coming on the show. Howard, what else is going on with you these days?
There's really that's about it right now. I mean, I'm doing a bunch of stuff. It's all fantasy football related. So if you are listening to this and you do play fantasy football, the draft guide over at Fantasy Alarm, it's a must-have. And I'm running a whole series of Beat Howard Bender leagues. So if you want to play me in fantasy football, rtsports.com/Bender, and then follow the Yellow Brick Road.
Sounds good. You can also read Howard in the New York Post if you're in New York, or I guess you can read it online. I do.
Great weekly article. Great weekly article. I love it.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate that. This weekend starts my my football column as well. So, this weekend I'll have a football and a baseball article sitting in the Post.
Yeah, I got you and Jared Wilk every week. Definitely part of my rotation of reading. Required reading, I should say.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right, Ruvain, what's going on with you?
You can follow me on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, at MLB Injury Guru, where I tweet out injury updates as they come, and they're coming fast and furious throughout the season. And I'll mention the guys who are coming up next. And you can catch my weekly article on Rotoballer discussing all these injuries to help you with your fab for Sunday.
All right, I'm Ariel Cohen. I'm over at Fangraphs, over at Rotoballer, on Twitter, X, at ATCNY. And, of course, you're listening to it right here on the Beat the Shift podcast presented by Fangraphs. All right, once again, thank you so much to Howard Bender for coming on the show tonight. And from all of us here at Beat the Shift, we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Beat the Shift podcast presented by Fangraphs. Follow us on Twitter at beat_shift_pod.